The early morning mist clung to Ember Ridge like a secret. Sunlight filtered through tall pines, casting silver shadows over the sloping ground. The Bennett family cabin, modest and hand-built, sat in a small clearing where birdsong should have filled the air. But this morning, it was quiet, too quiet. Claire and Ethan had left just 20 minutes earlier, trudging down a narrow trail to fetch supplies from the base of the ridge. Ivy, just 3 months old, slept soundly when they slipped out, wrapped in blankets in her crib near the fireplace. Ranger, their German shepherd, kept his post by the cabin door. Ears pricked, tail still. He didn't like the silence. It was wrong in a way instinct understood before the mind could. Then Ivy stirred, a soft whimper at first, then a growing cry. Ranger turned toward the cabin, ears flicking. He padded inside, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Ivy's cries grew louder, shrill now, the kind of sound that stirred something ancient in animals, a helpless plea. Ranger's body stiffened. There was something else, faint but there, a scent on the wind. Musky, predatory. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he bolted outside. His eyes scanned the tree line. Then he saw it. A cougar, long, lean, and hungry, perched on a boulder across the clearing, half shadowed by pine limbs. Its golden eyes locked on the cabin. Ranger barked sharply, once, twice, warning, challenge, alarm. The cougar didn't flinch. It stepped down from the rock, muscles rippling, stalking low toward the cabin. Ranger lunged forward, placing himself between the predator and the cabin. His barks turned frantic, fierce, and loud. He paced, tail up, every muscle taut. The cougar paused, head low, calculating. Inside, Ivy's cries pierced the stillness, raw and urgent, and something else heard it. From the ridge above, just out of sight, another shape moved through the trees. Slower, heavier, limping. A lioness. She didn't belong here. Her coat, though beautiful, was dulled by dust and flecked with blood. One leg dragged slightly behind her. She had escaped something, a cage. Maybe, or worse. Her ribs showed through her golden fur. And her eyes were wild. Not from aggression, but from pain, confusion, hunger. But when Ivy cried, something stirred in her. The lioness stopped, listened, then moved, slowly but with purpose, down toward the cabin. Ranger caught her scent and froze. A lion? Here? For a second. He didn't know what to do. The cougar had paused too, now sensing this new presence. It turned toward the lioness. Lips curled. Ranger didn't move. He stood frozen between two predators, his brain fighting instinct and duty. Then the lioness stepped into the clearing. The cougar hissed, tail twitching. It backed a few steps. The lioness didn't snarl, didn't charge. She limped forward, straight toward the cabin, ignoring the cougar entirely. Her ears flicked toward Ivy's cries. Ranger gave one short, confused bark, and then, impossibly, the lioness lay down, right there, just in front of the cabin steps. Between the cougar and the baby. She let out a low, guttural noise, almost like a chuff, not a threat, something else, something maternal. The cougar hesitated, its tail lashed once more. Then it turned, slinking back toward the trees, fading into the shadows. Ranger didn't move until he was sure it was gone. Then he approached the lioness slowly, nose low. He circled once. She didn't react. just lay there breathing heavily, her sides heaving. Her gaze never left the cabin. Inside, Ivy had quieted, whether from exhaustion or instinct. She had stopped crying. The quiet returned, but it was no longer heavy with dread. It felt different, watchful, guarded. 10 minutes later, Claire and Ethan reappeared, packs in hand, chatting softly. Ranger barked sharply. They looked up and froze. The lioness raised her head. Claire dropped her bag. Ethan reached instinctively for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. No sudden moves, Claire said under her breath. But the lioness didn't rise. She simply turned her head toward them and blinked. Slowly. Is Ivy? Claire didn't finish the sentence. She dropped the pack and ran for the cabin. Ranger let her pass, tail wagging hard now, barking once in excitement. Inside, Ivy was sleeping peacefully. Claire let out a sob and scooped her up. She's okay, she called out. Ethan stood still, watching the lioness. She saved her, he said quietly. She's not here to hurt anyone. Claire stepped out, Ivy bundled in her arms. She looked at the lioness. She heard the cry. She said, she protected her. The lioness struggled to stand, her hind leg trembling, but she didn't growl, didn't posture. She simply limped toward the forest, pausing once to look back. Then she vanished into the trees. Ranger followed her to the edge of the clearing, watched her go, then trotted back to the family. Ethan exhaled, still staring at the tree line. We'll need to call someone, he said. A ranger, maybe a vet. She's hurt. Claire nodded, still rocking Ivy gently. Yeah, but not to cage her. She came for the cry. They stood there for a long time, just watching the woods. Ember Ridge was wild. It was harsh. But that morning, it showed them something rare, a moment where nature paused its own rules for something deeper. The cry in the cabin had echoed into the forest, and the forest had answered. The sky above Ember Ridge had begun to bruise, clouds thickening as wind moved through the trees like breath over glass. In the hush that followed the morning's encounter, danger hadn't retreated, it had only paused. Ranger stayed alert near the cabin, pacing restlessly. Ivy slept again, her little body swaddled and warm, unaware of how close the wild had crept to her crib. The scent of the cougar still lingered in the underbrush, sharp, territorial, unfinished. Ranger knew it wasn't gone for good. He caught the rustle a heartbeat before the cougar reappeared, slipping back into the clearing from the opposite side. Eyes locked not on him this time, but on the cabin. Ranger charged. He launched himself forward, barking with every ounce of his voice. A warning and a promise. The cougar responded in kind, no longer hesitant, but hungry and sure. The two animals collided in a blur of fur and fury. Ranger was fast, trained, fierce, but the cougar was a predator built for this, longer reach. Sharper claws, relentless. The fight was brutal. Ranger managed to latch onto the cougar's shoulder, shaking with desperate strength, but the cougar raked across his side, drawing blood. Ranger yelped, staggered, lunged again. He had to protect Ivy, had to keep the cougar away from the door. But he was losing. The cougar pinned him, teeth bared, one paw raised to strike. Then the trees split with a sound like thunder. Sahara. She came bounding out of the woods, silent until the last second, then let out a roar that seemed to shake the ridge. The cougar whipped its head around just in time to see the lioness barrel into it, sending them both tumbling into the dirt. Ranger scrambled upright, bleeding but alive, watching as Sahara drove the cougar back, a flurry of teeth and raw muscle. She didn't give chase when it fled, she just stood, chest heaving, tail twitching, her eyes swept toward the cabin. Then she walked past Ranger, head low, and sat directly between the door and the forest. There was no mistaking her intention now. She was guarding it, guarding Ivy. Inside the cabin, something else stirred. Smoke. It had begun as a spark from the old electric heater Ethan had rigged in the corner, a faulty wire buried behind a stack of blankets. When Ivy's cries earlier had distracted Ranger, no one noticed the scent of melting plastic. Now, a thin plume of gray trailed upward, snaking across the rafters. A small, orange glow pulsed behind the crib, licking at the wood. Ranger smelled it before Sahara did. He barked sharply. Sahara turned her head. The smell hit her too, acrid, threatening. Ranger barked again, then lunged at the door. It was locked. The smoke thickened. Ivy started to cry again. A weak, frightened sound. The fire snapped louder. Sahara let out a low growl. Ranger backed up and rammed the door with his shoulder. Nothing. Sahara rose. She stepped beside him, looked at the door, then looked at him. Something passed between him. Understanding. Ranger lunged again. This time, Sahara added her weight. The door shuddered. Another hit, wood splintered. A third, the latch gave. The door flew open with a crash. Smoke billowed out. The fire had caught a blanket and was crawling up the wall behind the crib. Sahara moved fast, faster than Ranger had ever seen anything that size move. She reached Ivy first. Carefully, somehow gently, she leaned in and used her head to nudge the crib away from the fire. Ranger barked, darting to the side. The fire was still growing. Sahara turned, her side singed, and picked up Ivy by the blanket wrapped around her, lifting her as carefully as if she were a cub. She carried her out of the cabin. Ranger followed, coughing, singed, limping slightly. They emerged into the clearing just as Claire and Ethan broke through the tree line. Claire's scream split the air. Ivy. But what they saw stopped them cold. Sahara, the lioness, walked calmly from the cabin, smoke trailing behind her like mist. In her jaws, wrapped safely in her blanket, was their daughter. Ranger padded beside her, his fur scorched, a gash along his side. Both animals moved slowly, deliberately, toward the stunned parents. Sahara stopped a few feet away. She set Ivy down gently in the grass, then backed away. Claire ran forward, scooping Ivy up, trembling. The baby was crying but unharmed. Ethan knelt beside Ranger, inspecting his wounds, eyes flicking from the dog to the lioness. Sahara stood at the edge of the clearing. She looked at the family one last time, at Ivy, then turned and walked into the woods. No roar, no drama, just quiet steps into the trees until she vanished, leaving only paw prints in the dirt and smoke in the air. Claire held Ivy tight, tears streaming. She saved her, she whispered. Ethan looked down at Ranger, who lay panting at his feet. So did he. They stood in silence for a long time. The fire in the cabin now dying on its own, burned out against the cold air and the thin wet from morning dew. In the days that followed, the story spread, of a lioness that had come out of nowhere, guarded a baby, and vanished like a ghost. Rangers searched but found no tracks beyond the ridge. No signs of where she came from or where she went. But Claire and Ethan knew. Somehow, some wild, broken part of the world had chosen to protect them, to protect Ivy. And out in the trees, on quiet nights, Ranger still looked toward the woods. Ears up, tail wagging slightly, waiting for the one who had fought beside him. The one who had become more than a guardian. An ally. Spring came late to Ember Ridge. But when it did, it was in quiet bursts, budding leaves, moss softening the stones, and the sound of baby Ivy's laughter floating through the clearing. She was 9 months old now, chubby and curious, crawling through the cabin on all fours with Ranger never more than a few steps behind her. The gash on his side had faded to a scar, but his eyes remained alert, always scanning, always listening. Claire and Ethan had settled into a rhythm again, though the memory of the fire and the lioness never left them. They spoke of Sahara in low voices, like she might still be listening from the trees. Then one night, Ranger began to pace. It started after sunset. He growled at the shadows, ears pinned back, tail stiff. He refused to settle at Ivy's side, instead sitting by the door, watching the dark. He barked once, loud and sharp, then again. Claire rose from the couch. Ranger. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No eyes. No shapes. Just wind in the branches and the rustle of night creatures. Still, Ranger didn't calm. The next morning, a truck rumbled up the winding road to their clearing, a white 4x4. Old but well-maintained. A woman stepped out. She was tall, sun-worn, with a serious expression and a duffel slung over one shoulder. Her jacket bore the patch of a conservation group neither Claire nor Ethan recognized. She had the look of someone used to traveling alone, weathered boots, sharp eyes. "I'm looking for Claire and Ethan Bennett," she said without preamble. Ethan stepped forward. "That's us. I'm Dr. Celeste Rowan, wildlife biologist. I'm tracking a lioness." Claire blinked. "Sahara?" The woman's eyebrows rose. "So you've met her." They invited her inside. Ranger didn't growl, but he stayed close to Ivy, his gaze fixed on the newcomer. Dr. Rowan pulled out a worn leather notebook and set it on the table. "I've been following her since she escaped last fall. She was part of an illegal wildlife breeding operation in Arizona, exotics bred and sold to collectors. Sometimes for private zoos, sometimes worse." Claire sat slowly. "She doesn't act like a captive animal. She isn't ordinary," Dr. Rowan said. "I've seen predator behavior my whole life. Sahara is different. She's shown complex decision-making, emotional regulation, empathy." "Empathy?" Ethan echoed. "She's rescued smaller animals from traps. She's avoided livestock when she could have taken an easy meal. And then there's what happened here." She looked at them. "I read the ranger report. But they didn't believe it." "I did." Claire said nothing for a moment. "She saved our daughter. Twice." Dr. Rowan nodded. "Then she's bonded. I've seen that. Rarely. Sometimes animals imprint on people. Usually it's survival. But Sahara." She paused. "There's more. Her presence here is a risk." "Because of poachers," Ethan said. "Yes. If someone tracks her here, especially the people she escaped from, they won't care about boundaries. They'll come for her, and they'll kill anything in their way." Claire looked toward Ivy's crib, her voice low. "What do we do? I need to find her before they do." Dr. Rowan said, "If she'll let me approach, I can sedate her and relocate her to a sanctuary where she'll be protected." But I need help. Your help. She trusts this place. She may come back here. Ranger barked softly, as if in agreement. They spent the rest of the day planning. Dr. Rowan set up trail cams and scent markers at the edge of the clearing. Claire and Ethan began locking up tighter at night. And Ranger resumed his old patrol routes. Every step tense. 2 nights later, Ranger whined at the door again, low and urgent. Claire opened it slowly. Sahara stood in the trees. She looked thinner, wearier, but her eyes were the same, steady, golden, ancient. Claire stepped out, heart pounding. She's back, she whispered. Dr. Rowan approached carefully, tranquilizer in hand, but Sahara backed away. Not fear, caution. Ranger stepped between them, not to guard, but to mediate. He walked to Sahara, tail down, and gave a soft, low whine. Sahara looked at him, then past him, toward the cabin, toward Ivy. Then a sound shattered the moment. A gunshot. It echoed across the ridge. Flat and unmistakable. Sahara bolted into the trees. Dr. Rowan dropped to one knee. They're here. Claire grabbed Ivy. Ethan locked the doors. Ranger stood at the window, growling. They didn't sleep that night. By morning, they found the tire tracks. Deep, fresh, not from Dr. Rowan's truck. Another trail cam was smashed. The return of the wild, they realized, wasn't just about animals. It was about everything that came with him. Beauty, violence, instinct, greed. Sahara had returned, but so had her hunters. And Ember Ridge would never be the same. The air over Ember Ridge had changed. It wasn't the weather, though clouds hung low and the wind carried the bitter scent of rain. It wasn't the shifting of seasons, either. It was subtler, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Ivy, now almost 2 years old, toddled through the cabin on soft feet, chattering to herself. Ranger followed her like a shadow. His fur had grayed slightly, but his eyes were sharp, his ears constantly alert. That morning, Ivy stopped mid-step and pointed toward the window. "Oh," she said softly. Claire looked up from the sink. "What is it, love?" But Ivy just frowned and looked at Ranger. He was growling, low and steady. Claire moved to the window and saw it. The trees didn't sway normally. Birds weren't singing. Even the squirrels had vanished. Outside, the woods were watching. Ethan came in from the shed. "Something's wrong," he said before she could ask. No sounds, no movement. Dr. Rowan's words from months ago echoed in Claire's mind. They'll come for her, and they'll kill anything in their way. She grabbed Ivy and held her close. "We need to lock down. Now." Night fell early over the ridge. The shadows between the trees thickened until the whole forest seemed to close in around the cabin. That's when the first movement came. 3 men, dressed in dark hunting gear, crept through the underbrush, faces painted, rifles slung low. Their movements were smooth, deliberate, professional. They weren't just poachers, they were trackers. One of them whispered into a radio, "No sign of the lion. We're sweeping east of the cabin." Another pointed toward the trees. "Motion that way. Might be her." But they weren't alone. Sahara had returned. She had watched them from higher ground. Her body pressed low to the slope. Eyes narrow. Behind her, another shape moved silently, the cougar. The same one that had once threatened Ivy's life. Now, its loyalty had shifted. Something ancient had been stirred in both of them, a shared purpose. Forged not by human design but by instinct. They weren't just animals. They were guardians. Sahara moved first. She slipped through the trees. Tail low, paws silent, flanking the first poacher without a sound. Ranger, emerging from the clearing with a growl, took the other side. The poacher turned just in time to catch a flash of golden fur and hear a snarl. He screamed, one short, sharp cry, before dropping his rifle and bolting. The others opened fire into the woods. Panicked, Ethan hit the lights and pulled Claire and Ivy to the floor. "They're here," he muttered. "God, they're here." Ranger burst into the cabin moments later, bleeding from a graze but unshaken. He barked once, loud, then turned back toward the door. He wasn't running. He was calling. Sahara answered. The lioness charged from the trees with the cougar at her flank. Together, they struck like lightning, not for the kill, but for the drive. One man was knocked flat. His rifle kicked away into the brush. Another tried to run but was cut off by Ranger, barking with furious precision. The poachers weren't used to resistance like this, especially not from a coordinated group of animals working like a team. They fell back, shouting, scrambling for higher ground. Inside the cabin, Ivy pressed her tiny hand to the window, watching with wide eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Somehow, she understood. Claire looked at her daughter, then at the lioness outside. She came back for her. She whispered. Ranger circled the last man as Sahara stood still, body low, growling. The cougar hissed from the trees, blocking the path behind him. Then came the sound they'd all been waiting for: engines. A dozen headlights lit the trees. Rangers pouring out of vehicles with floodlights and rifles of their own. The poachers froze. Sahara didn't move until a voice called out from one of the trucks. "Stand down, animals." 2. It's over. It wasn't a command. It was a promise. The Rangers moved in quickly, securing the area, arresting the men, retrieving their weapons. Dr. Rowan jumped down from one of the trucks and ran toward the clearing. She found Sahara first. The lioness stood tall, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on her. "Easy, girl," Rowan murmured. "You did good." Sahara gave one short huff and turned toward the trees, but not before pausing by the cabin. Ranger stood beside Ivy, who had toddled to the front porch under Ethan's careful eye. The lioness and the toddler looked at each other across the space between them. Then Sahara lowered her head, blinked once, and disappeared into the woods. Dr. Rowan walked up beside Claire. "We'll secure the area, but this, all of this, proves something." Claire nodded. "She's not just surviving, she's choosing, she's defending." That night, the forest exhaled. The tension broke like a storm moving off the mountain. Rain came softly, washing away the blood, the fear, the scent of gunpowder. Ivy slept soundly for the first time in days. Ranger curled beside her crib, his head resting on his paws. Outside, in the trees beyond the light, the wild kept watch, no longer a threat, but a force awakened, aware, and allied. The hunt had come to Ember Ridge, but the wild had hunted back. The years passed gently over Ember Ridge, softening the scars and deepening the stories. Ivy grew into a child with wild curls and a gaze that saw beyond what most could, into the spaces between sounds. The meaning behind a growl, the weight of stillness in the forest. She spoke little at first, not because she lacked words, but because she listened in ways no one else did. By the time she turned 6, it became clear to Claire and Ethan that Ivy had inherited something rare. It wasn't just intuition, it was connection. She could feel what Ranger felt before he barked. She'd wake moments before a hawk passed overhead or a deer crossed the path. She once stopped her father from clearing an old stump behind the cabin, saying softly, "Someone lives there." Later that day, they found a family of foxes nestled inside. But it was with big cats, especially lions, that Ivy's bond reached something deeper. She began drawing them constantly, talking to them in dreams, sometimes waking with tears and whispering, "She's still watching." Sahara had not returned after the night of the poachers. Dr. Rowan believed she had gone deeper into the wild, avoiding human paths, aging in peace. For years, there were rumors, sightings from hikers, blurred trail cam photos, a familiar golden shape vanishing into mist. Then, one autumn morning, the call came. A ranger from farther up the ridge found her. Sahara had passed beneath a massive cedar tree, her body curled in sleep, her breath already stilled. She bore no wounds, no signs of suffering, just the quiet dignity of one who had given all she had and laid down when the work was done. But she wasn't alone. By her side was a young cub, golden like her, but smaller, with sharper features and cautious eyes. No one knew where he had come from. No one but Ivy. When she saw the photo, her breath caught. "She left him for me," she said. Claire and Ethan didn't argue. They had stopped questioning the wild logic of their daughter long ago. With the proper permits and guidance from Dr. Rowan, the cub, named Ash, was brought to Ember Ridge. Not to be tamed, not to be caged, but to grow under Ivy's care. Free and safe in the protected land now known as Sahara's Refuge. The region had transformed. What had once been isolated wilderness was now a sanctuary, funded, watched, and respected. Signs warned visitors to tread carefully. Rangers patrolled with purpose, not suspicion. And at its heart, a girl and her animals kept silent watch. Ivy became something of a legend. By 16, she was already speaking at conferences. Always soft-spoken but never unsure. She didn't dramatize the stories, she didn't need to. The facts carried their own power. She told them about Ranger, the protector, about the cougar, once feared, now thriving under protection laws that Ember Ridge helped shape. About Sahara, the lioness who had broken through instinct, through fear, to defend a child not her own. She didn't talk about empathy like it was mystical. She spoke of it as a skill, one animals had long possessed, and humans had simply forgotten how to use. As the years passed, Ivy took on a role beyond ambassador. She became a bridge, a wild link, as Dr. Rowan once called her. She helped redesign fencing policies for farmers to reduce predator conflict. She worked with biologists to introduce new tracking technology that didn't disrupt natural behavior. She even founded the WildLink Institute, offering training programs for young conservationists, not just to protect the wild, but to understand it. Ranger passed when Ivy was 18. His muzzle white, his body weary but loved to his last breath. She buried him beneath the cedar tree where Sahara had lain, placing a small carved stone between the roots. Ash sat beside her through the night, quiet, watching the stars. "I'm not alone," Ivy whispered. She knew I wouldn't be. In the years that followed, Ash became a father himself. His cubs roamed the outer edge of the refuge, carefully monitored but never interfered with. Ivy walked the trails often, alone except for the whisper of paws behind her. Visitors came, but only those with respect. Sahara's refuge was not a zoo. It was a story made solid, the tale of how the wild had once stepped forward to save a child. And how that child had stepped forward in return to save the wild. One summer evening, Ivy stood on the ridge as the sun dropped low. Below her, the valley burned gold, lions lounging near the water, a pair of cougars climbing the far slope. Hawks circled above, and in the trees, deer moved without fear. She closed her eyes and listened. Not for sound, for feeling. It was still there, the hum of connection. The soft thrum of life moving around her, through her, and somewhere, beyond the edge of sight. She felt her, Sahara, not as a ghost, not as memory, but as legacy. Ivy smiled. I hear you, she said, and she began to walk.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.